it soon became very clear that the EFF was not going to cooperate. It was not going to allow the question session to proceed. No matter how much patience was exercised from the chair and appealing to observation of the rules, in the end, there was no other way but to adjourn the session in order for us to go back to the drawing boards and very quickly apply the minds through the structures of Parliament, the appropriate structures in Parliament, as to how to proceed beyond this day. You know, having a question session is something that takes a long time to organize. When finally we have everybody relevant for the questions to be answered, to say the least, it's very sad for it to collapse like this because of a party that represents 6% of the vote. Even when all the other opposition parties have themselves expressed how strongly they felt, both about the issues on Nkandla, but also about going ahead with the question session. So that's where we are. We have adjourned. We just thought you should hear our perspective and you should feel free to ask questions so that we can clarify any matter that needs to be clarified. So we can go back to the structures and go back to taking decisions about what next. I will allow the other presiding officers to add whatever they wish to add. Madam Chair, Deputy Speaker.
No, Madam Speaker, I think the only point I really want to emphasize is that unless the institution is run according to agreement by the majority of parties, because we are a multi-party institution, it will be difficult to do anything else. If we allow disagreement with what the majority of the parties agree to derail the work of Parliament. That is at the heart of what we need to solve, so that all of us must play by the rules, presiding officers, members, political parties, so that the outcome of what happens here is the result of procedures and rules that we have ourselves adopted. To throw those rules out is a dangerous thing and we shouldn't allow it. We have said before that what is at stake is a democratic method of decision making that must be protected, which is what is under attack in what we saw happening in the House. We think it is possible to stop that, and we should do so without hesitation as soon as possible. It is urgent that we do that, otherwise the impression is created that Parliament is not able to deal with its affairs, and that's not what is going to happen. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much to the presiding officers. The Speaker did indicate a willingness on the part of the presiding officers to enter into a conversation with you about what happened this afternoon by way of you asking questions. So we'll take a round of questions. Please identify yourself, the media house you represent, and ask a question. We'll take a round of a few questions. Chantal, Sbu, Lester. All right, thank you very much.
Hi, just a question for the presiding officers. I'm Chantal from the African News Agency. Mr. Tsunudi, you said it was possible to prevent our democratic principles from coming under attack. What are you going to do about it? I mean, what's the next step?
Esther from ENCA. Madam Speaker, if you had the authority to call the Sergeant at Arms to remove any unruly member, why did you not take or exercise that right to calling the Sergeant at Arms to remove any member that you thought was being unruly?
Hi, it's Siyabonga Mkhwanazi from Independent Newspapers. Just wanted one question. Will there be any disciplinary action taken against people who are involved in disrupting proceedings today?
That is the first round of questions. We'll afford the presiding officers an opportunity to address those issues before we proceed. Over to you, Madam Speaker.
Can you just repeat the first question, Chantal?
What is the way forward from here? I mean, what are you going to do? You're saying our democratic principles are under attack, and how do you stop this?
Thank you very much. To be able to, the structures that have been created in Parliament are such that parties, by discussion, consultation, democratically to arrive at decisions. And where there's a problem of disagreement of one kind or another, and a party wishes to object, that is normally noted. But if the party insists on having a vote on that, they will demand that that matter be handled that way. So the House, in plenary, such as it happened yesterday during a motion that was suggesting how matters must be dealt with today, took a vote. That's the democratic way of handling things. Now, if we are prevented from doing that, it means we must look at what happened and who was wrong in how they approached this thing, and then we must call on the rules to answer those questions. And that's what's going to happen. To apply the rules, and if they are not adequate, to consider reinforcing them so that we can strengthen our ability to handle that stuff. And that's the first at the most basic point. We have continued to try to persuade, to use persuasion, to say we do not have to agree, but we don't have to stop the proceedings of the House. Let's take steps to consider all options, including processes and so on. This is why the Speaker, in a number of instances, has called all parties to consult them on how to handle some of these matters in a manner that will satisfy them, as she did, for example, ahead of the report that the Minister of Police came here. They were consulted because that's a sensible democratic way of handling difficult issues. We don't arbitrarily on our own make decisions about that. Now, when people reject and act outside of those parameters, then it means that we must find ways that are according to the rules that will enable us to proceed with the work of the House without allowing them to stop the work of Parliament. That's what we are going to be looking at. The inadequacies that we are noticing in our ability to enforce the rules will obviously receive huge attention so that we enable ourselves as the House to enforce the rules of the House, and that no one party must be able to railroad things in the House. There must always be things done in accordance with the rules. So we will consider a variety of methods that are available to us to enforce democratic running of Parliament.
I want to start off by saying, I think embedded in the very concept of Parliament is the acknowledgement that we all come from different places, different perspectives, different political parties, different ways of doing things or understanding things. So that's a given when we come to Parliament, to become one collective of these members that come from these different places, but who must come here, and precisely because that is acknowledged, we have rules that are about enabling us, in spite of our differences, to talk to one another, to differ, to engage, to find ways of doing things together in the interest of South Africa. So I think it's important for us to factor that into our understanding of the institution, of the assumptions as we come here that inform our approaches to working together. That's why we have the structures that we have, including the Chief Whips Forum, which meets very regularly precisely to allow these different perspectives to be put on the table, to be engaged with, to be accommodated, and for ways to be found for us to move forward. So I think I want to start with that. Now, is there going to be a disciplinary hearing? I said earlier that we will leave this press briefing, put our heads together, find the best way forward. Find the best way forward. I mean, part of what was done this afternoon is that more than an hour was spent with whips of different parties trying to persuade one another as to the best way to move forward. But of course, a minority in that meeting is, at this point, who has disrupted the business of the day, and in fact, we've had to adjourn without having started with the business of the day. I did call the Sergeant at Arms at some point. I did, and in fact, I was told by the Secretary of the National Assembly that she made an effort to indeed implement her part of what normally is expected to help us deal with these situations. But part of the way forward is we will relook at that capacity, the capacity of the Office of the Sergeant at Arms. If you look around the world, you will know that many parliaments are a lot more capacitated in relation to that office to enable the work of Parliament not to be disrupted. And I think that's part of what we have to engage with.
Thank you, presiding officers. Do we have a second round? Wendell? Paul? Rahima?
Sorry, the question on disciplinary proceedings. Siyabonga's question. Sorry, could you answer that, please?
There were clearly a number of people who simply rose and spoke without being recognized. And incidentally, this is not the first time they do that. And the problem of disrespecting, disobeying, because this respect is also often distorted. When you deny the authority of the referee, you can't continue to play for a long time. Very soon you get a red card. That's normal in any rule-based organization. We are a rule-based organization. If you violate the rules of the House, you must face the consequences of such violation. And their nature, including questions of aggravation, will be looked at so that those matters are dealt with by the appropriate structures. It is necessary to do that. It's part of what we refer to as the necessity to enforce the rules of the House. Because even where in previous instances these matters were overlooked and not acted upon, it seems that there's a need for us to urgently attend to it strongly, perhaps more than we've done before, so that we clear this, that there's an understanding that no rule-based organization can operate effectively without them being respected and adhered to. Otherwise, we are slipping into a very problematic manner. And unfortunately, also members of parliament who swore and took an oath to obey the law, including the constitution, are themselves openly saying that they will not adhere or agree with and or follow the rules, and that nothing will happen rightly in the House until what they want to see happening gets done. Now, you can't literally tell the entire parliament that it's your way or no way. That's absolutely unheard of. It can't be allowed to happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
Wendell from Reuters. I just want to find out from the presiding officers, spoke now, Deputy Speaker. Do you accept that in a closed environment, bureaucracy, rule-based norms can be used to stifle debate? That rules can be used to enforce a particular hegemony, particularly in an environment where there is such a large majority of, in this case, of the ruling party. Second question: do you not think that a punitive sort of a stick versus the carrot, or whatever the case may be, a punitive approach, enforcement, is actually going to lead to a situation of exacerbating this current impasse that we have now, that things are just going to get worse and not better? The third question relates, you mentioned the referee. Now, the referee has emerged in this, and this, I don't want to flog a dead horse. Madam Speaker Mbete has spoken about this previously. But certainly the perceived biasness on the part of the Speaker, who is supposed to be an independent person in terms of the rules of Parliament, is also now emerging as a constant refrain amongst particularly the EFF. Not asking whether the Speaker would countenance possibly recusing herself, but how do you build that trust again? How do you get into a situation where the two teams that are playing on the field, to use your sporting metaphor, respects the referee? There isn't a separate censor that rules that the referee heard by allowing the try, or the goal was offside, or whatever the case may be.
Thank you, Wendell.
Yeah.
I think the point has been made. Rahima? You covered. Okay. Thank you.
Can I quickly say the following point? You chose the rules approach that I mentioned. I did say expressly that the original orientation was a political approach, to use persuasion, to call people to meetings to talk about, we've got a difficult report that we have in our hands. How do we manage it so that we handle it properly in Parliament, because it is our responsibility collectively to hold the executive to account. That's a political approach. That's not a punitive approach. Now, you need both. Unfortunately, in any rule-based organizations, the potential for use, for abuse, as you say, is both ways, theoretically, because others can use them not only to refuse to play by the rules, because they have no intention to do so in the first place, because they have also indicated so right from the onset, did not make it a secret that they are not going to play by the rules. So when a house that has historically, traditionally is based on the rules, is confronted with that phenomenon, there's very little room if political persuasion fails, if it appears it is failing, to use the other rule. Both must work together. Both persuasion, political imploring of all members of Parliament to see this. And in this instance, it's not the majority that is insisting on the rules alone. It's the majority of political parties. In other words, out of the 13 political parties, one says, no, It heads the other way direction. The entire 12 goes the opposite direction. It's the majority of political parties. So it's a very different thing from imposing the ANC hegemony, if that's the insinuation, well intended to illustrate an important point about the possibility for abusing rules and so on. But in this instance, it's a question of, I'm sure you would have listened to yourself and heard what other political parties' frustration was with being prevented from holding the executive to account, which as presiding officers, we have a responsibility to ensure it happens. So that's the part that I think we were dealing with and we were being frustrated about. That if we can't use persuasion, what else is there for us to advance this thing properly? No method must be given priority above all the others. All of them must work together to produce a good results. Even in sports, referees' bias, for one reason or another, is no justification.
Well, those were the presiding officers of Parliament addressing the members of the media, of course, on the disruption processes that actually occurred earlier on. And
are going to be taken out because it is incorrect, because you are no longer being fair, okay? Because the game is meant to be played fairly at all times. Otherwise, you risk the reputation of those you represent. As members of Parliament, when people see people behaving that way, they don't say it's that party, they say MPs. All of us. So that's the problem that we're confronted with, that we need to be able to handle those issues in that manner. The obligation to persuade and be persuaded is a responsibility not only of the majority party or of the majority parties, it is a responsibility of the minority party as well, to persuade and be persuaded. If you refuse to be persuaded, not once, not twice, every time, really, something is wrong there.
I think we must also look at how the rules of parliament are arrived at. All parties, all whips are represented at the rules of either and both houses' rules committees. Parties that are smaller in number to have whips are allowed to have representatives. And the only thing they can't do is vote, and hardly ever do you vote at rules. All parties had, at any time, a chance to make amendments, to propose new rules. So it cannot even be conceived that the majority will always use the rules, because all the rules are agreed to by all parties. Now, the other question you put is whether the Speaker should consider recusing herself from what? There is a particular political party that accuses the Speaker of being biased. For that matter, that accuses the chairperson of the NCOP for being biased. The system of South Africa says that the party that wins nominates, gets its people elected into those positions. It has been like that since 1994. It is something which was discussed right at the beginning, even before we elected our first democratic government. So it is not new, and I do not think that when there is an issue that needs to be faced on, we should actually say, no, because you are so-and-so and you come from the majority party, therefore. The fact of the matter is that the authority of the National Assembly vests with the Speaker of the National Assembly. And therefore, it is not true that all members of the National Assembly are equal, because there is one person who is the authority in the National Assembly. Our rules are crafted to satisfy that provision of the Constitution. I think it is Section 57.
it enables us to come out with rules to do our internal business. If the internal business is unconstitutional, of course, the parties do take the liberty to take us to court. But once they have tested and they are satisfied, then we are all bound equally by the rules we have adopted. When a presiding officer exercises the same rules we have agreed to, he or she cannot be said to be biased. And of course, we must ensure that at all times we impart whatever rulings as blindly as we can across the parties and across the members of the House. And that is what we strive to do. So I would say that the last question you put to us, the carrot and the stick, wouldn't you agree that, in fact, today there was a lot of patience exercised? That, yes, the Speaker would have remembered that she is still within her rights as the authority of the NA to have said they are disobeying, they are not heeding the instructions to have used the security. We didn't. She didn't. Very deliberately, because in fact, maybe we thought it is high time that South Africa has sight of what we are going through. Now, you may look at it as a very simple thing, but the attack on Parliament is the attack on the third leg of the state. And that for us becomes important, because that for us says that South Africans must begin to wake up and smell the coffee.
Thank you very much. Do we have a final round? Okay, second helpings for Lester. Is there any other hand? There's no other hand, so Lester, yours will be the final question.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. You preempted my question by asking, not prejudging or not giving my own opinion on it. Was the Speaker wary of calling in the security forces as she did during the State of the Nation?
Of course, I'm not in the mind of the Speaker. But I think that decision is always taken with a lot of consideration and a lot of circumspection. And I think today, when the National Assembly broke and the whips wanted to discuss, the Speaker was correct in allowing the whips, who are responsible, by the way, for the disciplines and the attendance within their parties, to deliberate and to bring solutions. Precisely because any other action might have been misinterpreted as the presiding officers shielding the president from responding. And I'm sure we are all happy, because one by one those parties came back to say, we want the president to be held account, we want our time to ask the questions, and it is question time today. So the Speaker did very well in not going to the last resort. And calling in the security, I think, in our mind is always the last resort. We want to talk, we want to negotiate, we want parties to lobby. We want to get to solutions without having to resort to what the gentleman there said is the stick.
Okay, Jan.
Chair, firstly, my apologies for being late. You will know it's not my way, but my colleagues are not in Cape Town, so I had to first do my job, which is to send copy. And I don't know what your own decisions were here, but I'm just surprised that the chair of the NCOP is answering the question on behalf of the Speaker, whom I do not know to be so timid as to not to be able to speak her own mind. So I wondered whether it would be fair to ask Lester's question, correctly as the Chair said she can't be in your head, Madam Speaker. What happened in your head and what were you thinking about calling or not calling the security people?
I know the Speaker will answer, but please remember, Parliament's executive authority is the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. What affects this House affects Parliament, and therefore there is no way anything that happens in the National Council of Provinces, the Speaker can say, I am not affected as Parliament. We are all affected.
The presiding officers came here this afternoon to address the media collectively, as we have done in the past. And, you know, there's no pre-decision that you will handle this, you will handle that. We simply come, say what we have to say, allow questions to come, and the one who, you know, feels they want to answer has the freedom to do that. And, you know, once you've said what you've said and really there's no need for another person to repeat it, that's how we deal with how we engage with other people, because we work as a collective. We have structures where we meet regularly as presiding officers to share perspectives about the work we do, to even discuss rules and whatever challenges that the institution might be facing. So about the question of whether the question of throwing members out came through my mind, no. It's always an option at the back of our minds, because indeed we have that option according to the law. The powers, privileges and immunities of Parliament and provincial legislatures definitely provides for us to take certain steps should we reach a point where we believe we need to do that. But under the circumstances, it didn't pose itself as an option today. And it also helps to be able to allow certain occurrences to unfold, to allow not only members of Parliament, political parties that are represented here, but also the public to observe for themselves and to reach their own understanding, grapple with the issues, because although we are brought here through being elected by people, by the electorate, we also know that South Africans are very highly politicized. They have an understanding of what's going on out there and in politics, and in particular in this fifth term, we know they're observing proceedings of Parliament. So sometimes it's good to allow the public to observe occurrences, and hopefully they would also make comments and will enrich our own grappling with these issues.
Please. Sorry, Madam Speaker. Earlier on, I heard you, and you confirmed what you said in the House. You did call for the sergeant at arms, which means that you did consider removing them.
That's not calling the police.
But that was the first step, certainly, in the process to have them removed.
I did, but I didn't consider calling the police to throw people out. No.
10 steps to bake a good cake. So, I don't question my being a cook. I'm saying there are 10 steps to bake a good cake. Sometimes you may choose to reduce them to see what the effect is on the nature of the cake you are baking. No, the point I want to raise really now, you won't eat it. What are you saying? If flour is what you are going to use to do that. No, the point I want to raise now is I want to go back to the question about the Speaker and perceptions of her bias. You see, the credibility of that story is also made difficult by the fact that soon, even before she sat on her seat, she was already targeted by all political parties because she's a chairperson of the African National Congress. So that's the first point I want to make. But subsequently, all of us in conducting our business in the House, now and then there are decisions that we will make that we will reconsider because we could have taken different decisions about those instances and so on. Because there are people who, members who repeatedly do the same thing. Every day, the same thing. Now, one of the options we have is to say, no, we don't allow you anymore to do this. Oh, you are being biased. Why not me? Because every day, this is what you do. You speak without being recognized. You speak without pointing out what rules you are speaking under. You always want to give us the state of address of your seat without reference to the rules. Really, I mean, like those kind of things are irritating, and we are human beings, and it must be necessary for us now and then to do that, to point out to them that we don't accept that, and we will not allow them to speak. And of course, they are biased, they are biased. Of course I have to be biased against you if you are a constant violator of the rules. That's my personal position, and that's how I would handle a person who behaves like that in the House. The other important, and this is the rules. You see, as chairs in presiding, the difficulty we have, there are people who are very angry at us allowing what is happening in the House, including members of parliament themselves who are very frustrated and angry about us, in their opinion, allowing what is happening here and calling on us to take stronger measures and so on. And I'm talking about members of all political parties who have expressed it, possibly to yourself already, about their own frustrations about the need to take stronger action, that Parliament should long have taken stronger actions and so on. I'm pointing that out to suggest to you, members of the media, that the task of conducting our affairs in here depends on us in the House collectively agreeing to use the rules. Stepping outside of the rules in a problematic manner creates problems. We've got structures in Parliament where such perceptions must be taken to the structures of Parliament to handle, to hear that they've been submitted. These are the submissions about the conduct of the Deputy Speaker, of his bias on the following matters, ABC. We would like the committees that deals with these matters to deal with this instance and so on. So that those structures must deal with those issues. That's what they are designed for. Now, if you go outside of Parliament instead of doing that, it means, in fact, even if there may be partially true that there is bias, but indeed you never intended in any way to use the structures of Parliament to resolve the problems. And this is our problem, that we are confronting a difficult issue of handling members of Parliament, as I said before, who constantly, deliberately do not want to obey the rules. We would prefer sometimes to have discussions. We'll also notice when we introduce the new rules, when they do come at a certain stage, for people to speak without reference to the rules. We accept the most basic ones, the most basic that enables that when you speak, someone else must not be speaking as you speak. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's so basic it hurts to even think about it, which is what is happening here.
And with a point of information, in case you haven't noticed, we are involved in the process of reviewing the rules, and it's all of us, all political parties. Part of the difficulty is that I'm sure members of the public who observe and follow what's happening in Parliament, even members of our political parties who are not here, who are out there, who are watching Parliament and are as frustrated as the members sitting in all the benches here about the goings on here, sometimes don't understand how slow or why the process is so slow. And the process is slow because it is a highly consultative one. And in between apart from allowing work to be done at a technical level before it is brought to the subcommittee of the rules, is because you need to commit members. You need to allow them the time to think about issues. You need to allow for a process where the majority of parties or members who are involved in this process are agreed on one way, but there's another one who doesn't agree. You give the space to try and persuade one another. You also allow parties to then, once the issues have moved from that first technical level, coming up to the subcommittee level, having discussed, having heard what the differences are, still